Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honour at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted."
Jenny, I always try to start looking at a passage by trying to see if there's anything I need to unpack or understand before we try and apply it to today.
Sure.
And it occurs to me that this phrase, the scribes and Pharisees, which we find often in Matthew's Gospel, needs a little bit of unpacking.
Who are these guys?
Well, exactly, who are they? Well, the Pharisees, they get a really bad showing in Matthew's Gospel, of course, but the Pharisees were, in some ways, the holy church-going people of Jesus' day. But they really built their religion, if you like, around keeping the law of Moses, and particularly the minutiae of the law. And that we need to understand that to get this here.
Right.
And clearly
So they're good intentions.
Good intentions.
Because we talk about someone being pharisaical, don't we, nowadays?
Yeah, we do.
I mean, it's not a compliment.
Not at all. And we actually see that in this passage here, where Jesus says, well, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of... it just doesn't make sense. It's upside down type of world. And the scribes, of course, were the learned lawyers, I guess, or theologians, perhaps, would be a better term for us today, who also should have known, and did know, what was required of them. And as we see so often in Matthew's Gospel, they often seem to put restrictions rather than make it easy for people to get there.
Right, so they sort of...
So...
It's all a bit close to the bone, though, isn't it? I mean...
well, especially for people like you and me to be talking like this. Because
and that whole... practice what you preach, and that's come into common parlance.
Indeed.
Too, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But don't practice what they teach.
Don't practice what they... Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about walking the talk, don't we? And Jesus' criticism of the Pharisees is that they actually were not walking the talk.
Right, yeah.
They were putting these obligations on other people, but they were not really prepared to do it. Yeah. However, they did want the limelight. And that, if we go on a bit, this thing about the phylacteries and the fringes long, this is all different types of dress and little things that they wore on their foreheads and on their arms to show, in a way, to show how holy they are. Yeah. And again, it's a little bit uncomfortable because you and I wear dog collars to identify themselves. I think of it as a uniform myself.
But it's also something that people can put upon you. I'm thinking of this, have the best place at banquets. I mean, people will say, it's another Jesus parables, isn't it? Come up higher. You sit yourself down somewhere and you're chatting away, and then someone says, come up higher, come up to the high table or whatever.
And so it's often very uncomfortable for us, simply because we're clergy. You're pulled up to some special place. Right. Although I have to say, not so much in New Zealand as in other places in the world. Yeah.
But I'm thinking too of, we're heading up to an election and all that's happening in our country, and I mean we're very good at this country of sort of putting people up on pedestals and then knocking them down, and politicians are out there sort of doing all their touting for business and kissing babies and whatever, and there is that whole seductive thing of power, and they're all going to be saying, we're out to serve the people and da-da-da-da, and I'm sure the Pharisees had good intentions too, but it's very easy for it to sort of get twisted and
So when we come and read on in the chapter, I mean, these really quite strong words: do not call anybody rabbi, or do not let yourself be called rabbi or father or instructor. Interesting translations we've got in the New Revised Standard Version here. I think in some of the older versions it's do not be called master.
Right. Yeah.
And then verse 11: the greatest among you will be your servant. And how often Jesus comes back to that idea.
Yeah.
The first will be last, the last first.
And I suppose there were those too. I mean, he's talking to the crowds. I'm sure there were those among the crowds who were they were enjoying Jesus' popularity and things.
Yeah.
And he's actually sort of saying to them, well, he drops that word Messiah in there. I mean, they had huge expectations of this big sort of celebrity figure. And he's actually perhaps suggesting something else. Something much more humble is going to happen.
Which, of course, I mean, in the context of Matthew's Gospel, we're rapidly moving towards the end of it with the crucifixion.
Yep.
And with that shocking end of here's the Messiah who will die, who will die on the cross.
Yeah.
So expectation. The other interesting little thing that's maybe worth looking at is the way Jesus starts about talking in the third person, the scribes and the Pharisees, but suddenly from verse 8 it changes to you,
right,
addressing very directly to the people, to us,
right, yeah,
and it's an interesting change there.
Yes.
So food for thought, and
and a challenge to all of us, I think.
Indeed.
Yes.